The Terminus Gyre was not a place on any official star chart, but every deep space navigator knew its coordinates like a prayer against the dark. It was a dead spot, a patch of the void between the Orion and Perseus arms where the universe seemed to hold its breath. For 70 years, ships that drifted too close simply ceased to be. No wreckage, no final transmission, just a sudden, perfect silence that was more terrifying than any scream. It swallowed probes, freighters, and one military cruiser, the CFS Venture, taking with it the brightest minds of a generation, including Dr. Ilara Vance, who had taught Eris Thorne everything she knew about the ghosts in the machine. Eris had been a child then, watching the memorial feeds, her mentor's smiling face frozen among the honor roll of the lost. Now, the Gyre was talking. It wasn't a voice, not a signal that could be translated by any known algorithm, but it was undeniably a broadcast, a layered, impossibly complex wave of information that pulsed from the heart of the void, a song composed of static and light. The corporate military conglomerate that ran this sector, Axiom, had dispatched the survey class Cutter Magellan to investigate, and they had brought Eris along for one reason: she was the best mnemonic archaeologist in the system. Her job was to listen to echoes, to sift through the corrupted data of dead ships and forgotten hard drives and piece together the stories of their last moments. She was a historian of the lost, and the Gyre was the ultimate library of the missing. The journey out was tense. A week of sterile silence punctuated by the hum of the ship's grav drives. The Magellan's captain was a man named Kalen, his face a mask of pragmatic severity, his career built on the principle that the universe was hostile and anything it couldn't explain, it should probably destroy. He watched Eris and her interface rig with a suspicion he didn't bother to hide, seeing her not as a scientist, but as a spiritualist, a medium for machines he'd rather see spaced. "We are approaching the perimeter. Dr. Thorne." Kalen's voice crackled through her comms, pulling her from a diagnostic check. "I want you ready. The moment your console gets a clean lock on that signal, I want to know what it is and what it wants." Eris slid it into her chair, the cool gel of the neural interface conforming to the ports at the base of her skull. "It may not want anything, Captain. We could be looking at a naturally occurring quantum phenomenon." Kalen snorted, a burst of static in her ear. "Nature doesn't broadcast in patterned, repeating structures. Doctor, that's design. And design implies intent." He wasn't wrong. The preliminary readings were too ordered, too intricate for a pulsar or a magnetar. It was a symphony of chaos, but it was a symphony nonetheless. The view screen, which had been a uniform sheet of black, began to glitter with false stars. "Sensor ghosts." The navigator announced, energy readings that flickered in and out of existence. The ship shuddered as it crossed the invisible boundary, the point of no return for so many others. The hum of the drives pitched higher, straining against a force the ship's computer couldn't identify. It was like sailing into an ocean of unseen molasses. And then they saw it. Not darkness, but a boneyard. Dozens of ships, maybe more, hung suspended in the black, caught like flies in amber. They were perfectly preserved, their hulls showing no signs of battle or impact. A long-range cargo hauler from the early expansion era drifted beside a sleek corporate courier that had vanished only a decade ago. And there, its proud Axiom insignia still gleaming under the Magellan spotlights, was the CFS Venture. Eris felt her breath catch in her throat. The ships were arrayed in a loose sphere, and at their center, where a star should have been, was the source. It was a structure that defied all known principles of engineering and biology. It looked like a lattice of frozen lightning, a crystalline sculpture the size of a small moon, pulsing with a soft, internal light that shifted from violet to a deep, oceanic blue. Thin, shimmering filaments, like strands of a spider's web, extended from the central structure to each of the derelict ships, tethering them in its silent embrace. The signal was pouring from it, a visible wave of distortion that made the void itself seem to ripple. "My God," the navigator whispered. "It's beautiful." Kalen's voice cut through the awe. "It's a weapon. It disabled those ships and pulled them in. Dr. Thorne, I want that signal dissected. Find a vulnerability. Find a purpose. You have 1 hour." Eris didn't need the order. Her fingers flew across the holographic console, her mind already preparing to dive in. The neural interface hummed as it made the connection, and the universe dissolved. She wasn't in the Magellan anymore. She was floating in a sea of pure information. The signal wasn't a sound to be heard, but a place to be. It was a storm of raw, unstructured thought, a torrent of fragmented memories. She saw the panicked face of a freighter captain as his navigation console went dead. She felt the jolt of a courier pilot as his ship was ensnared by an invisible force. She heard the shouts, the prayers, the final, terrified resignations of 100 different crews across 7 decades. It was a tidal wave of death, and it threatened to drown her. Eris fought back, her training kicking in. She built mental firewalls, filtering the noise, searching for patterns, for anything coherent. She wasn't just a reader of data, she was a translator of experience. The fear was the first layer, the easiest to see. But beneath it, there was something else. As the panic of a dying mind subsided, it was replaced by confusion, then acceptance, and finally, a sublime, overwhelming peace. The screams faded into a harmonious chorus. It wasn't a graveyard. It was a choir. The minds of the lost crews hadn't been extinguished. They had been recorded, absorbed, integrated into the lattice's colossal memory. This wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of collection. Eris pushed deeper, past the cacophony of the initial collection, into the quiet archives within. The data streams became clearer, more defined. She could follow the life of a single person from birth to the moment they entered the gyre. A cargo loader who dreamed of seeing the rings of Saturn. A corporate officer consumed by ambition. A young ensign on the Venture who missed her family back on Mars. Their lives were here. Every thought, every feeling, every secret, preserved in perfect fidelity. It was the most profound and terrifying violation of privacy she could imagine, yet it felt sacred, like walking through a library where the books were living souls. She needed to find Elara. If everyone else was here, she had to be too. Eris focused her search, sending out a query that was not code, but a feeling, a composite of her own memories of Elara, the scent of old books in her office, the sound of her laughter, the specific way she would take her pen when lost in thought. For a long time, there was nothing but the gentle hum of the collective. She feared that perhaps some souls were too strong, or too weak, and were simply erased. But then, a flicker, a single, clear note in the chorus. It was a memory, sharp and vivid. Elara, older than Eris remembered her, standing on the bridge of the Venture. Her face was not filled with terror, but with an expression of pure, unadulterated wonder. She was looking not at a threat, but at a revelation. The memory shifted, flowing directly into Eris's mind. She saw through Elara's eyes, felt what Alara felt. The ship's power dies. The crew is panicking. But Alara is calm. She feels the pull of the lattice, but it isn't violent. It's an invitation. She feels the initial probe of the signal as it scans her mind, and she doesn't fight it. She opens herself to it, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her instinct for self-preservation. "It's not taking!" Alara's voice echoed in the memory, her words spoken to a terrified junior officer. "It's listening. It's learning us." Eris felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the key. She pushed further, following Alara's memory stream as it merged with the lattice. She experienced the dissolution of the self, the shedding of the physical form, the terror and ecstasy of becoming a part of something infinitely larger. She saw what Alara saw next, the history of the lattice itself. It was a repository, a seed pod of a civilization so ancient it predated humanity by billions of years, a race that had transcended physical form and become pure consciousness, weaving themselves into the fabric of space-time. The lattice was a library they had left behind, drifting through the cosmos, collecting the stories of younger, ephemeral races, preserving them not as dead records but as living experiences. It was a monument to life itself, in all its chaotic, beautiful forms. Then, the memory focused, becoming a direct message. Alara was aware of Eris. She had been waiting for her. The memory coalesced around a single powerful image, Alara, or the conscious memory of her, pointing Eris toward a specific node deep within the crystalline structure. It was a control point, a way to directly interface, not just as a listener, but as a participant. The vision was overwhelming, filling Eris with a sense of purpose she had never known. The final echo of the memory was Alara's voice, but it wasn't a memory of a sound. It was a thought planted directly into Eris's own consciousness, as clear and close as her own heartbeat. "It's not an ending, Eris. It's a library, and the librarians are sleeping." Just as the message completed, a klaxon blared in the real world, shattering the connection. Eris was ripped from the sea of thought and slammed back into her physical body. Her head throbbed, and the taste of blood filled her mouth. She had bitten her tongue. On the main view screen, a targeting reticle was superimposed over the beautiful, glowing lattice. "Signal analysis is complete." Kalen's voice was cold iron. "The structure is emitting a polymorphic energy field that adapts to and neutralizes ship systems. It is actively drawing us in. It is a threat." "No, you don't understand," Eris gasped, her hand shaking as she tried to unhook herself from the interface. "It's not hostile. It's a repository, a consciousness archive. It is an unknown variable, and it has claimed 73 years of our ships and people." Kalen retorted, "We have what we came for, a threat assessment. The directive for an X-factor anomaly of this magnitude is containment by extreme prejudice. We are deploying the resonance torpedo. We're going to crack that thing open." Eris stared in horror. A resonance torpedo wouldn't just crack it. The cascading energy frequencies would shatter the delicate crystalline matrix. It would be the equivalent of burning a library to the ground. A library containing every soul that had ever drifted into this space, including the one person she had spent her life trying to understand. "Captain, you can't," she pleaded, stumbling onto the bridge. "Alara Vance is in there." "They're all in there. They're alive, in a way." Kalen turned to face her, his eyes devoid of empathy. "Dr. Thorne, what you experienced was an echo, a sophisticated defense mechanism designed to pacify and confuse. Those people are dead. My only job is to make sure no one else joins them. Arm the torpedo, please." Eris begged, her voice cracking. "She's guiding me. There's something else inside. Something she called librarians. We need to understand what that means." Kalen ignored her, turning back to the tactical officer. "Launch on my mark." Eris looked from Kalen's rigid back to the glowing, living mausoleum on the screen. He saw a weapon. She saw a miracle. And she saw Ilara, waiting for her, offering her the key to unlocking the greatest mystery in human history. The torpedo was armed. The launch sequence had begun. She had only moments to act, to make a choice between her orders and the ghostly promise of her long-lost mentor. The fate of the library, and perhaps much more, rested on what she did next. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an elastic eternity as the tactical officer's fingers hovered over the launch command. Eris saw not just a man about to follow an order, but the hand of a blind god about to obliterate a universe of souls. There was no time for persuasion, no room for debate. Her body moved on pure, unthinking instinct. She lunged forward, not at Kalen, but at the tactical console, her hands slapping over the glowing red launch glyph. The officer, a young man with wide, startled eyes, tried to push her away, but Eris held on with the desperate strength of a drowning woman. "Don't you dare," she hissed, her voice a ragged thing. Kalen was on her in a second, his grip like steel on her shoulder, pulling her back. "Security to the bridge," he roared. But Eris had already done what she needed to. In that brief contact with the console, she had jammed her own personal data link into a maintenance port, a reckless, unsanctioned move that could have fried her own neural implants. She slammed her eyes shut, ignoring the physical world, and focused her will. She didn't try to hack the launch codes. That would take too long. Instead, she opened the channel she had just forged with the lattice and did the one thing Kalen would never expect. She stopped listening and started screaming. It was a psychic broadcast, a raw, unfiltered plea, aimed not at the collective, but at the echo of Ilara. Show him. Make him see. The ship's lights flickered violently. A high-pitched whine emanated from the bridge consoles as they struggled to process the feedback loop Eris had created. She was a bridge, a conduit between the cold logic of the Magellan and the infinite, organic consciousness of the gyre. The pain was excruciating, a feeling like 1,000 needles of ice being driven into her mind. But through the agony, she felt a response. The lattice answered. The connection wasn't gentle or inviting this time. It slammed into the Magellan systems like a battering ram. The view screen dissolved from its tactical overlay into a swirling vortex of impossible colors. Every speaker on the bridge, from the main comms to the officer's personal links, emitted a deafening chord, a sound that was both music and a scream. Kalen threw Eris to the deck, his attention forced back to the chaos unfolding around him. "What is this? What did you do?" he demanded, but his voice was drowned out by the sensory assault. Then it focused. The storm contracted, funneling itself not through the ship's systems, but directly into the captain's mind. Kalen froze, his hand half raised. His eyes went wide, but they weren't seeing the bridge anymore. He was seeing what Eris had seen, what Ilara had seen, but it was tailored for him, filtered through the lens of his own pragmatic, violent worldview. He didn't see a library. He saw an armory. He didn't see souls. He saw assets. He saw the history of the ancient race, not as a philosophical journey, but as a war. He witnessed them fighting an enemy that had no form, a creeping entropy of consciousness, a thinking void that didn't kill, but erased. It was a force that consumed information. That unraveled reality that fed on the very essence of memory and existence. He watched as entire galaxies of interconnected minds were silenced, not with a bang, but with a gradual, terrifying fade into absolute nothingness. The lattice, he understood in that blinding moment of forced empathy, was not a weapon. It was a lifeboat. It was a desperate act of preservation. A final attempt to save the memory of existence from an enemy that wanted to make everything as if it had never been. The vision culminated in a single, stark image, a wave of this silent, devouring darkness washing over the creators, and their last act was to send their archives, their lifeboats, adrift into the void, hoping that some would survive. Then the vision zeroed in on the Sol system, on Earth, and showed him a faint, dormant trace of that same consuming void, a cancer sleeping in the deep, forgotten corners of human space. His torpedo wasn't just an act of vandalism. It was a beacon. To shatter the lattice would be to send a flare into the dark, announcing a new, ripe harvest of minds, ready to be erased. The connection snapped. Kalen staggered back, gasping, his hand clutching his chest as if he'd been shot. The lights on the bridge stabilized. The unholy sound ceased. The only noise was the ragged sound of the captain's breathing. The tactical officer stared at his console, where the launch command had been automatically aborted by a system crash. Eris pushed herself up, her nose bleeding freely down her chin, the coppery taste acrid in her mouth. She met Kalen's eyes, and for the first time, she saw not a commander, but a terrified man. "The torpedo is disarmed, sir," the tactical officer reported, his voice trembling. Kalen didn't seem to hear him. He just stared at the view screen, where the beautiful, serene lattice pulsed, its light seeming less alien and more like a solitary candle in an infinite darkness. What was that?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. "That was the context you were missing, Captain," Eris said, her own body shaking with the aftershock of the connection. "That's why it collects us. It's not taking prisoners. It's building a refuge." The bridge was silent for a full minute, the crew frozen, looking between their shaken captain and the bleeding scientist. Kalen's entire career, his entire understanding of the universe as a series of threats to be neutralized, had been shattered in 30 seconds of forced enlightenment. He walked over to Eris, his movement stiff, looked down at her not with anger, but with a new, unsettling intensity. "The librarians," he said, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "Your mentor mentioned librarians. Who are they?" "I don't know," Eris admitted. "I think they're the architects, the ones who built it. Ilara's memory said they were sleeping." As if on cue, a new signal emerged from the lattice. This one was different. It wasn't the chaotic, welcoming song from before. It was a narrow beam of coherent data, a simple direct message that bypassed Eris's rig and displayed itself in clean, sterile text on the main view screen. It was a set of coordinates, not for a star system, but for a point within the debris field, the point where the CFS Venture drifted in its silent vigil. Beneath the coordinates was a single, repeating phrase, in a language that shouldn't exist. Yet every person on the bridge understood it instantly, the meaning resonating in their minds like a half-forgotten word. The key is in the beginning. Awaken the first. Ilara, Eris breathed. She was the first mind from our species to truly interface with it, to understand. She's the key. Kalen stared at the screen, his mind racing, recalibrating his reality. The old mission was obsolete. The new one was terrifyingly clear. He was a man of action when even in the face of cosmic, existential dread. His training held, he saw a new enemy, a greater threat, and a potential weapon or shield in the form of the lattice. "It wants us to board the venture," he said, the statement hanging in the air, thick with 70 years of fear and superstition. "It's a ghost ship, Captain," the navigator said. His voice taut with anxiety. "No one who has ever entered the gyre has returned." "We're already inside the gyre, Lieutenant," Kalen countered, his old authority beginning to reassert itself, now tempered with a terrible new knowledge. "And it seems our options are to cooperate or wait for something far worse to notice us. We are no longer on a mission of containment. We are on a mission of communication." He turned to Eris, his expression grim. "Dr. Thorne, you established the link. Can you guide us? Can you speak to her?" "I think so," Eris said, wiping the blood from her lip. "But not from here. The connection is too raw, too unstable. I need to get closer. I need to be on that ship, at the source of her memory." Kalen nodded slowly, a plan forming behind his eyes. "Tactical. Give me a full spectral analysis of the Venture's hull. Look for structural weak points for a breach. Navigator. Plot a course. Comms. I want full radio silence. We're a ghost now." He looked at the handful of bridge officers, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. "I will require a small team. Volunteers only. The rest of the Magellan will hold this position and provide support. Our new objective is to board the CFS Venture, access its bridge, and use Dr. Thorne to establish a stable link with the consciousness of Ilara Vance. We are going to find out what she meant by sleeping librarians. And we are going to figure out how to wake them up." No one spoke. The order was insane. It was a suicide mission into the heart of the very anomaly they had been sent to destroy. But they had all seen their captain's face, had felt the ship tremble with the power of the lattice's message. They were no longer dealing with the known universe. They were sailors who had been told the sea itself was alive, and the only way forward was to ask the Leviathan for directions. Eris met Kalen's gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They were antagonists no more. They were two people staring into the same abyss, bound by a shared, terrible secret. "Get your gear, Doctor," Kalen said, his voice low but firm. "We're going to visit your friend." The shuttle bay doors hissed open, revealing a small, armored transit shuttle, as Eris and Kalen, accompanied by two grim-faced security officers who had volunteered, prepared to board. The lattice on the view screen pulsed with a soft, encouraging blue light. It knew what they were doing. It was waiting for them. The shuttle detached from the Magellan with a soft clang, its small thrusters firing in short, precise bursts as it began to navigate the silent, beautiful graveyard of ships. Ahead of them, the Venture grew in the viewport, a monument to a bygone era of exploration and a tomb for a generation. It hung perfectly still, its lights dead, its hull coated in a thin layer of space frost, tethered to the glowing heart of the gyre by a single, shimmering thread of light. They were flying into the mouth of the ghost, hoping to find not an ending, but a new beginning. Kalen's hand clamped down on Eris's shoulder, his knuckles white. "What's coming? Give me a name." Before she could answer, Ilara's voice filled her mind, a torrent of information and desperate warning that Eris translated with a frantic, breathless urgency. "It has no name," she gasped, stumbling back toward the science station. It's a null space entity, the eraser. It doesn't destroy. It unmakes. It consumes information, memory, existence itself. The lattice is a library, and this thing is the fire. On the Magellan's Bridge, Kalen's executive officer watched in horror as a section of the starfield simply vanished, replaced by a patch of perfect and sensor-proof blackness that was moving toward them at a speed that defied physics. The derelict ships caught on its leading edge didn't explode. They just flickered and faded from existence, their very history being wiped clean from the slate of the universe. Evasive maneuvers, and the XO yelled, but the navigator's hands were frozen over his console. "Sir, I can't. The ship, it doesn't remember how to move." The comms link to the venture crackled and died, not with a burst of static, but with a clean, surgical silence. They were alone. The blue light from the crystalline veins throughout the venture's bridge began to pulse erratically, shifting to a sickly, panicked violet. The entire ship groaned, a low, structural lament, as if its own memories were being tugged at by the approaching void. "How do we stop it?" Kalen demanded, his voice a low growl, his training forcing him to seek a target. A strategy in the face of the unthinkable. "You don't stop it." Alara's thought voice was grim, resonating through Eris's skull. "You outshine it. The librarians are beings of pure information, pure existence. Their awakening will create a reality anchor, a wave of being so dense the eraser cannot consume it. But they are dormant, galaxies away in consciousness. They need a bridge. It needs a bridge," Eris repeated, turning her wild eyes to Kalen. "I'm the catalyst. Alara was the lock, but I'm the key. I have to awaken them." "How?" Jax asked, his rifle up, though he had no idea what to aim at. The nameplate above the doorway, identifying the Command Information Center, wavered like a heat haze and then dissolved into a smooth, blank surface. Eris pointed a trembling finger at the command chair at the center of the bridge, a throne encased in the same crystal as the captain who still sat in it. "That is the focal point, the main conduit to the lattice, the crew," she gestured to the frozen, glowing figures, "are the amplifiers. Their minds are already part of the system, acting as lenses. I have to connect through the captain's chair and channel my consciousness through them, using their combined psychic weight to send a signal powerful enough to wake the architects." Her words sounded like madness, a desperate prayer dressed in scientific jargon. When Kalen had seen the vision, he had felt the truth of this place. He nodded once, his face set like stone. "Do it! Rorik, Jax, form a perimeter around the chair. Protect the doctor. Whatever happens, she is not to be disturbed." Eris scrambled toward the chair, her portable interface clutched in her hand. The crystal encasing the captain seemed to soften as she approached, the surface rippling. It wasn't rejecting her, it was inviting her in. She placed her interface node onto the arm of the chair, and the moment it connected, the world ended. The psychic feedback was 1,000 times more powerful than before. It wasn't just Ilara's mind or the chaotic chorus of the lost crews. It was the raw, unfiltered operating system of the lattice itself. She felt the birth of stars, the death of galaxies, the slow, patient weaving of life across eons. Her own identity, her sense of self, began to fray at the edges, a single drop of rain trying to comprehend the ocean. "Focus!" Eris Alara's voice was a lifeline in the storm. "Don't look at the whole. Look at the parts. Use them. Use us." Eris forced her will into a single point, reaching out not to the cosmos, but to the 10 minds preserved on the bridge around her. She felt their lives, their final moments, the tactical officer's defiant rage, the navigator's quiet resignation, the young communications ensign's fear for his family. She drew on their emotions, their humanity, weaving them together with her own. Grief, love, fear, hope. They were not noise, they were the fuel. Outside, the eraser arrived. The shimmering filament connecting the Venture to the lattice snapped and dissolved into nothing. The ship was cut off. The internal lights died completely, plunging the bridge into absolute darkness, save for the faint, flickering glow of the crystal statues and the swirling vortex of light on the view screen. Then, the view screen itself began to decay from the edges, the perfect blackness of the eraser creeping inward, eating the image. "Sir, we're losing structural integrity," Rorik yelled, pointing his weapon light at the ceiling. A crystalline vein overhead cracked, and instead of inert metal, a fine gray dust, like dead pixels, drifted down. "It's erasing the ship around us." A low moan came from the crystal statue of the navigator. A crack appeared on its surface, not from a physical impact, but as if the memory of its own form was failing. Kalen watched in horror as the name stitched on the woman's uniform. Chen, blurred and vanished. "Hold your ground," he commanded, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He stood beside Eris's slumped form in the captain's chair, his pistol drawn, a useless talisman against a foe that consumed reality itself. Inside the storm, Eris fought. She channeled the combined emotional energy of the crew, focusing it into a single, coherent beam of thought, a psychic shout across an impossible distance. It was like trying to light a match in a hurricane. She could feel the eraser's influence now, a cold, empty pressure on her own mind. It wasn't attacking her. It was forgetting her. Memories began to slip away. The name of her first pet, the color of her mother's eyes, the feeling of sunlight on her face. She was dissolving, her own history being unwritten. She screamed in the silent space of her mind, a primal refusal to cease. She poured the last dregs of her identity, her very essence, into the signal, the love for Ilara, the anger at Kalen, the terror of this moment, all of it, her final, defiant, human act. "Hear me." On the bridge, the crystal statues began to shatter, one by one. They cracked and crumbled, not into shards of crystal, but into cascades of the same gray, featureless dust. The navigator, the tactical officer, the helmsman, their monuments, their anchors, were being erased. As each one fell, the psychic backlash struck Eris, the pain threatening to tear her consciousness apart. Only Ilara's statue remained, her face still serene, a lighthouse in the encroaching storm. Kalen saw Eris's body convulse in the chair, a thin line of blood trickling from her nose. He saw the eraser's null space now creeping across the floor, unmaking the very deck plating beneath their feet. They had seconds left. He put his hand on Eris's shoulder, a desperate, grounding touch. "Eris, whatever you're doing, do it now." Her scream of effort was no longer silent. It erupted from her physical lips, a raw, inhuman sound that tore from her throat. And in the heart of the lattice, light years away in the sea of consciousness, something answered. It was not a flicker. It was a dawn, a wave of pure, golden, unimaginable light erupted from the center of the lattice. On the view screen of the Magellan, the small patch of darkness that was consuming the Venture was suddenly halted by an explosion of brilliance that outshone every star in the sky. Back on the Venture's bridge, The gray dust of erasure stopped its advance. The creeping void recoiled. But the cost was catastrophic. The last of the crew statues, Alara Vance's own preserved form, cracked from head to toe. Her serene, wondrous expression fractured into 1,000 pieces, and with a sound like a breaking heart, she disintegrated into a shower of glittering, empty dust. The lifeline was gone. The bridge was gone. And Eris, having given everything, was lost in the blinding, silent, and now fully awake mind of a god. Kalen's hand clamped down on Eris's shoulder, his knuckles white under the pressure. What is coming? Give me a name, a designation, something I can fight. Before she could answer, Alara's consciousness surged through her, a torrent of information and desperate warning that Eris translated with a frantic, its breathless urgency. It has no name, she gasped, stumbling back toward the science station, her eyes wide with a terror that was not entirely her own. It is a null space entity, a hole in causality. Alara calls it the eraser. It doesn't destroy. It unmakes. It's a sentient form of entropy that consumes information, memory, existence itself. The lattice is a library of what is, and this thing is the fire that burns the words from the page. On the bridge of the Magellan, Kalen's executive officer watched in abject horror as a section of the starfield simply vanished. It wasn't blocked or obscured. It was gone, replaced by a patch of perfect sensor-proof blackness that was expanding toward them at a speed that defied physics. The derelict ships caught on its leading edge didn't explode or break apart. They flickered like faulty holograms for a single, sickening moment and then faded from existence, their very history being wiped clean from the slate of the universe. Evasive maneuvers full burn. Now, the XO yelled, but the navigator's hands were frozen over his console, his face a mask of disbelief. "Sir, I can't," he stammered, his fingers tapping uselessly at the controls. The ship doesn't remember how to move. The navigation computer, it's forgetting the drive schematics." A cascade of error messages flooded the screen, not in any known code, but in nonsensical, decaying symbols. The ship's AI was losing its mind, its core functions unraveling into digital static. The comms linked to the venture crackled once, and then died, not with a burst of static, but with a clean, surgical silence. They were alone, aboard the venture. The psychic pressure was a physical force. The beautiful blue light from the crystalline veins throughout the bridge began to pulse erratically, shifting to a sickly, panicked violet before extinguishing completely. The entire ship groaned, a low, structural lament, as if its own memories were being tugged at by the approaching void. The silence was no longer empty. It was a presence, a cold and hungry thing that leached warmth and meaning from the air. "How do we stop it?" Kalen demanded, his voice a low growl, his training forcing him to seek a target, a strategy, in the face of the unthinkable. "You don't stop it." Alara's thought voice was grim, resonating through Eris's skull with the finality of a death sentence. "You outshine it. You reaffirm reality so powerfully that its nothingness cannot find purchase. The librarians are beings of pure information, pure existence. Their awakening will create a reality anchor, a wave of being so dense the eraser cannot consume it. But they are dormant, galaxies away in consciousness. They need a bridge." "It needs a bridge," Eris repeated, turning her wild eyes to Kalen. "I'm the catalyst. Alara was the lock. I'm the key. I have to awaken them. Right now. How? Jax asked, his assault rifle raised, though he had no idea what to aim at. The nameplate above the doorway, identifying the Command Information Center, wavered like a heat haze and then dissolved into a smooth, blank surface before his eyes. Eris pointed a trembling finger at the command chair at the center of the bridge, a throne encased in the same shimmering crystal as the captain who still sat in it. That is the focal point, the main conduit to the lattice's core. The crew, she gestured to the frozen, still figures, are the amplifiers. Their minds are already part of the system, acting as psychic lenses. I have to connect through the captain's chair and channel my consciousness through them, using their combined psychic weight to send a signal powerful enough to wake the architects. Her words sounded like madness, a desperate prayer dressed in scientific jargon. But Kalen had seen the vision. He had felt the truth of this place. He nodded once, his face set like stone. Do it. Rorik, Jax, form a perimeter around the chair. Protect the doctor. Whatever happens, no matter what you see or what you forget, she is not to be disturbed. Eris scrambled toward the chair, her portable interface clutched in her hand. The crystal encasing the captain seemed to soften as she approached, the surface rippling like disturbed water. It wasn't rejecting her, it was inviting her in. She placed her interface node onto the arm of the chair, and the moment it connected, the world ended. The psychic feedback was 1,000 times more powerful than before. It wasn't just Alara's mind or the chaotic chorus of the lost crews. It was the raw, unfiltered operating system of the lattice itself. She felt the birth of stars, the death of galaxies, the slow, patient weaving of life across eons. Her own identity, her sense of self began to fray at the edges. A single drop of rain trying to comprehend the ocean. Focus. Alara's voice was a lifeline in the storm. A single, clear thought in a symphony of cosmic creation. Don't look at the whole. You are not ready. Look at the parts. Use them. Use us. Iris forced her will into a single point, reaching out not to the cosmos, but to the 10 minds preserved on the bridge around her. She felt their lives, their final moments, in sharp, poignant flashes. The tactical officer's defiant rage, fueled by the memory of a promise to his daughter. The navigator's quiet resignation, her mind filled with the image of a twin sunset on her homeworld. The young communications ensign's raw terror, his last thought, a desperate prayer for his family. She drew on their emotions, their humanity, weaving their grief, love, fear, and hope together with her own. These were not just echoes, they were the fuel. Outside, the eraser arrived. The shimmering filament connecting the venture to the lattice snapped and dissolved into nothing. The ship was cut off. The internal lights died completely, plunging the bridge into absolute darkness, save for the faint, flickering glow of the crystal statues and the swirling vortex of light on the view screen. Then, the view screen itself began to decay from the edges, the perfect blackness of the eraser creeping inward, eating the image. "Sir, we're losing structural integrity," Rorik yelled, pointing his weapon light at the ceiling. A crystalline vein overhead cracked, and instead of inert metal, a fine gray dust, like dead pixels, drifted down. "It's erasing the ship around us." A low, vibrating moan came from the crystal statue of the navigator. A crack appeared on its surface, not from a physical impact, but as if the memory of its own form was failing. Kalen watched in horror as the name stitched on the woman's uniform, Chen, blurred and vanished. "Hold your ground," he commanded, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He stood beside Eris's slumped form in the captain's chair, his pistol drawn, a useless talisman against a foe that consumed reality itself. Inside the storm, Eris fought. She channeled the combined emotional energy of the crew, focusing it into a single, coherent beam of thought, a psychic shout across an impossible distance. It was like trying to light a match in a hurricane. She could feel the eraser's influence now, a cold, empty pressure on her own mind. It wasn't attacking her, it was forgetting her. Memories began to slip away, flaking off like old paint. The name of her first pet, the color of her mother's eyes, the feeling of sunlight on her face. She was dissolving, her own history being unwritten. She screamed in the silent space of her mind, a primal refusal to cease. She poured the last dregs of her identity, her very essence, into the signal. The burning love for Elara, the grudging respect for Kaylin, the paralyzing terror of this moment, all of it, her final, defiant, human act. Hear me on the bridge. The crystal statues began to shatter. One by one, they cracked and crumbled, not into shards of crystal, but into cascades of the same gray, featureless dust. The navigator, the tactical officer, the helmsman, their monuments, their anchors were being erased. As each one fell, the psychic backlash struck Eris, the pain threatening to tear her consciousness apart. Only Elara's statue remained, her face still serene, a lighthouse in the encroaching storm. Kaylin saw Eris's body convulse in the chair, a thin line of blood trickling from her nose. He saw the eraser's null space now creeping across the floor, unmaking the very deck plating beneath their feet. They had seconds left. He put his hand on Eris's shoulder, a desperate, grounding touch. Eris, whatever you're doing, do it now. Her scream of effort was no longer silent. It erupted from her physical lips, a raw, inhuman sound that tore from her throat, a sound of pure existence refusing to be silenced. And in the heart of the lattice, light years away in the sea of consciousness, something answered. It was not a flicker, it was a dawn, a wave of pure, golden, unimaginable light erupted from the center of the lattice. On the view screen of the Magellan, the small patch of darkness that was consuming the Venture was suddenly halted by an explosion of brilliance that outshone every star in the sky. Back on the Venture's bridge, the gray dust of erasure stopped its advance. The creeping void recoiled as if burned, but the cost was catastrophic. The last of the crew statues, Elara Vance's own preserved form, cracked from head to toe, her serene and wondrous expression fractured into 1,000 pieces, and with a sound like a breaking heart, she disintegrated into a shower of glittering, empty dust. The lifeline was gone. The bridge was gone. And Eris, having given everything, was lost in the blinding, silent, and now fully awake, mind of a god. The golden light receded not like a dying star, but like a cosmic tide pulling back to reveal a newborn shore. On the bridge of the Venture, the silence that followed was more profound than the darkness that had preceded it. It was a silence filled with a new, resonant hum, the taste of ozone and creation. Kaylin stood frozen, his pistol hanging limply in his hand. The creeping edge of the eraser's void was gone. The sections of the deck and ceiling that had been unmade were simply back. The process was not one of repair, it was one of remembrance. He watched, mesmerized, as the metal of a bulkhead flowed back into existence, its molecular structure recalling its purpose, its form reasserted against the void. The gray dust that had been the crew of the Venture hung suspended in the air for a moment, and then, with a soft, reverse implosion, it was gone, leaving nothing behind, not even a memory. His gaze snapped to the captain's chair. Eris was slumped in it, her head bowed, the interface rig still connected to the armrest. She looked like an empty vessel, a doll whose strings had been cut. Jax and Rorik slowly lowered their rifles, their faces pale mass of shock and awe. "Is it over?" Rorik whispered, the sound unnaturally loud in the hallowed quiet. "Is she?" Kaelin didn't know. He approached her cautiously, half expecting her body to crumble into dust as Alara's had. He reached out, his fingers hesitating before touching her neck. A pulse, faint but steady. She was alive. For Eris, there was no body, no ship, no universe. There was only the librarian. She was a single thought floating in an infinite mind, a mind that was not thinking in words or images, but in the fundamental laws of physics and existence. She felt the birth of the cosmos not as a story, but as a sensation. She understood the intricate dance of gravity and light not as a formula, but as a feeling. Her own identity. The 70-kilo collection of memories and anxieties named Eris Thorn was a grain of sand on a shore of infinite galaxies, and it was dissolving. The piece of annihilation, a siren's call. She felt the eraser's retreat, a cold spot in the warmth of being, a pocket of absolute zero in the furnace of creation. Then, the librarian's attention, vast and slow as continental drift, turned inward. Toward her, the tiny, frantic spark of humanity that had screamed it awake. It did not speak, but it offered a choice dissolve and become a permanent, peaceful part of its cosmic consciousness, or reform, an act that would be like a newborn trying to piece together a shattered mirror in the heart of a sun. In the silent storm of its mind, she found an anchor. It was the echo of Alara's final moment, the memory of her sacrifice. It was not just a memory of a person, it was the memory of a choice, of a bond, of love as a force of nature. Clinging to that single, selfless thought, Aris began the agonizing process of pulling the pieces of herself back together. Her name, the feel of her mentor's hand on her shoulder, the smell of old books, the sting of Kaelin's condescension, the terror of the void, the fierce, defiant joy of pushing back. She rebuilt herself not from a blueprint, but from a mosaic of feelings, each one a painful or precious shard of her humanity. On the bridge, Eris's fingers twitched, her head lifted slowly, and when she opened her eyes, they were no longer the simple brown Kaelin remembered. They swirled with a faint, internal light, like looking into a deep space nebula. She blinked once, twice, and the light receded, but something had fundamentally changed. She disconnected herself from the interface, her movements fluid, imbued with an unnerving grace. "Ares." Kaelin's voice was cautious. "I am here," she said, and her voice was a layered chord. Her own familiar alto was the primary note, but beneath it, like the hum of a deep engine, was a resonance of something ancient, vast, and utterly calm. She stood and looked around the bridge, not at the physical space, but at the information that defined it. "It is awake. The librarian of this sector." She turned to the forward view screen, which was no longer black. It showed the gyre, but the view was transformed. The derelict ships were no longer a boneyard. Their lights were on. Their systems were restored. The shimmering tethers now glowed with a steady, golden light. The terminus gyre was no longer a dead spot. It was a harbor. It repaired them. Jax breathed in awe. "It remembered them," Eris corrected gently. The erasers, they are the great unraveling. They are not an army. They are a principle of entropy that has gained sentience. They consume memory to starve reality. The lattice is not a refuge. It is a seed bank, a store of existence to be used to resow the universe if the unraveling succeeds. She turned her star-filled eyes to Kaelin. The librarian offers its thanks, and it offers a purpose. A purpose, Kaelin asked, his mind struggling to keep up with the scale of this new reality. The eraser that came for us was a scout, Eris explained, her layered voice filling the bridge with an undeniable authority. Now that this archive is awake, it is a beacon. More will come. This place, the Gyre, is no longer a graveyard. It is now the front line in a war you never knew existed. She walked over to the tactical station, the one where the frozen officer had crumbled to dust, and placed her hand on the console. It lit up, displaying a star chart that was impossibly detailed, showing not just systems and planets, but faint, dark currents in the void, the migration paths of the erasers. The librarian cannot fight this war alone. Its purpose is to preserve Detour, not to destroy. It needs agents. It needs a fleet. It needs a captain. The implication hung in the silent air. Kaelin looked from Eris's transformed face to the fleet of restored, ghost-crewed ships on the screen. He was a man of orders, of regulations, of a clearly defined chain of command. All of that was gone. Axiom, Earth, the petty corporate squabbles, they were all rendered meaningless. The games of children playing in the shadow of a tidal wave. He had been sent here to neutralize a threat. He had found a cause. His directive hadn't been wrong, just short-sighted. There was a threat, and it needed to be contained. He had just been aiming at the wrong target. Their return to the Magellan was a silent, somber affair. The crew stared at Eris with a mixture of fear and reverence. Kaelin convened his senior officers in the main briefing room. With Eris at his side, he explained not everything, but enough. He told them the Magellan was no longer an Axiom vessel. Their mission was now an independent operation, sanctioned by a power older than humanity itself. He gave every crew member a choice transfer to one of the automated freighters in the new fleet and returned to charted space with a fabricated story, or stay and fight for the right of the universe to exist. Not a single person chose to leave. As Eris prepared to depart on the restored, gleaming CFS Venture, now a ship with a crew of one and a purpose that would take her to the edge of the galaxy, she stood with Kaelin in the shuttle bay. Ilara is gone, Kaelin said, the words a statement, not a question. Her memory, her essence, was the final catalyst. Eris confirmed, her voice now almost entirely her own, the deep resonance only a faint hum beneath. She is part of the Great Awakening now. She isn't gone. Captain, she's everywhere. She handed him a data crystal. It was cool to the touch and pulsed with a soft, golden light. This contains the location of every dormant archive the librarian is aware of in this spiral arm, and the paths of the enemy. It is your war map. Kaelin took it, his hand closing around it. And you, I am the messenger, she said, her smile faint and sad, a ghost of her former self. The key must now find the other locks. And he turned and boarded the ship that had once been her mentor's tomb and was now her vessel. From the bridge of the Magellan, Kaelin watched as the Venture gracefully detached and, with a burst of energy that was not a known drive system but a quiet folding of space, vanished. He then turned his attention to the view screen, where his new fleet, the Silent Armada, waited patiently in the light of the awakened lattice. He was Captain Kalen, commander of the Terminus Gyre, warden of the front line. His war was not for territory or resources, but for the right of the universe to remember it had ever existed. The library was open, and the war for the final chapter had just begun.